Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
So I want the scariest stories you got /x/wood stories, unexplained monster sightings. I want it all. Scary story thread, preferably what you've experienced.
My time to shine. Not really paranormal, though. Growing up, I lived in a wooded farmland kind of area full of rivers, streams, forests, and fields. Although it's now mostly just nature preserves, a great deal of the land used to belong to maybe 2 or 3 farmers who lived in the area. This meant going hiking almost always necessitated trespassing to a certain extent. Luckily, the land was incredibly vast, so as long as it wasn't harvesting season, we only had a slim chance of being caught. This was a blessing to me and my friends. For us, these surroundings guaranteed an almost infinite area to explore. Throughout my childhood and even in my adult life, the area we jokingly referred to as the Shire offered countless adventures and memories. One of these memories, however, sticks out in my mind more than any other. When I was in middle school, we went on one of our regular hikes to one of the bigger creeks in the rolling hills behind my house. The group consisted of 3 of us: me, my friend, and my other friend, second friend's little brother. The brother was the youngest of all of us and also the most easily frightened, especially about the prospect of going deep into the woods in the middle of the winter. But despite his concerns, we set off. After spending hours crossing a few fields, we crossed into the patch of woods that surrounded the creek. We walked down a trail until we came to a part where the path curved around the hill to the right of us, obscuring any view onward. That's when we heard a woman screaming. My first reaction was to see what was wrong, but my friend held me back. His brother was literally too scared to move and didn't want to leave him. Even without the screaming, these woods are pretty scary in the winter. Still, I forced myself to inch forward, horribly curious about just exactly what the hell was going on. It seemed like with every step closer, the screaming got louder, and I began to understand what the woman was saying. She was begging. I distinctly remember "Oh God, please no" as being one of her shouts. It was the sort of thing you would hear in a horror movie. Then suddenly, the screaming stopped. For a brief moment, everything seemed to hang in the air. The sudden shift in volume from the shrill screaming to absolute silence had made it seem like we had suddenly lost our sense of hearing. And then she started again. Only this time she was only able to get out a single syllable before the deafening sound of a gunshot filled the forest. We fucking booked it. We hightailed it the hell out of there, smashing through briar bushes, running in mud and water, not stopping to take a break until we were almost a half-mile away. My body was sprinting on complete autopilot, doing everything it could to assure that I didn't end up like that woman. Once we got to the barn that sat on the outskirts of my family's property, we finally found it in us to stop running. My friend looked on with a completely blank expression as his brother vomited and started sobbing. After we calmed ourselves down, we ran back to my house and told my mom, who phoned the police. It took about a half hour of waiting before a single disinterested and annoyed officer arrived. With my mother and the police officer, we forced ourselves to venture back into the woods to get an idea of what had happened. The police found nothing. No footprints, no casings, no blood, nothing. Although I can get an idea of what happened on that day, none of us will be exactly certain because we never actually saw it. If my assumptions about what happened are correct, however, one thing is certain. Whoever murdered that woman was never caught. And given the tight-knit rural community in which we reside, there's a high chance that whoever did it is still living among us.
The creepiest shit I've experienced happened to me on my way home one dark night at 1 a.m., walking down a street that came out of the woods, and on the part I was walking on, ran next to these woods. Now there was a kindergarten and a hotel on this part of the street, which is called Römerstrasse, which translates to Roman Street. Behind the hotel, and I mean directly behind it, was an intersection, where I would have to take a left, and around that intersection and next to the street is the forest. As I approached the hotel, walking on the pavement, I saw a black cloaked and hooded figure standing in front of the hotel at the intersection, facing the woods. I panicked and walked onto the actual street but still advanced. As I did so, The cloaked figure took off its hood and revealed itself to be a pretty red-headed woman, staring into the woods with her icy blue eyes. As I drew closer, I noticed that the cloak was open and that she was wearing a scarlet corsage and that she was also barefooted. This all seemed very strange to me, keeping in mind that I was 16 at the time. I was both amazed and scared shitless at the same time, and I still had to take that left turn, which meant having to pass the stranger closely or staying on the street. I chose the street, and felt weirded out even more when I saw this A1 copy of the G-Man coming up to the intersection from my destined direction. I slow down and let him approach the woman. He taps her on the shoulder and talks to her. I didn't hear what he said, but it made the girl follow the man back from where he came and onto the hotel's premises. I know this sounds incredible. This is a true story.
Weird shit in the woods, eh? I have one of those stories. Back in 2007, I lived with my family in North Carolina. I was in the 10th grade at the time. That's not especially relevant, but noteworthy, I suppose. Anyway, behind our house was a wooded area that had always kind of creeped me out for whatever reason. It just had this really ominous feeling to it. One day during Christmas break, my older brother and I decided, hey, let's go hang around in those woods. I mean, as creepy as they were, it's not like anything particularly dangerous lived back there. So we strapped on our boots, put on some jackets because it was cold outside, and set off. After walking for about an hour, we found this old derelict house. It had to be from at least the late 1800s or early 1900s. Since it was in the middle of the woods and obviously abandoned, we kicked the door in and went exploring. The house held nothing noteworthy, a few pictures here and there, but nothing else. Our perusing led us up to the second story. Once more, nothing noteworthy, but when we looked out the window, we saw something odd. There was an old guy in a brown jacket and a trucker hat digging a hole. To be more specific, it seemed to be a grave. Somehow he determined he was being watched and looked up at where we were. Our eyes met. My bro and I bolted. We got back to our house, locked ourselves inside, and sat there in silence, fully expecting him to come through the door at any moment. TLDR fuck the woods.
Was at a school camp. I don't know whose twisted idea it was, but a teacher decided that it would be a nice activity to take a group out into the forest, somewhat 2 kilometers out, maybe more. Was a 15-minute walk directly into the forest, at about 11 p.m., for us to reflect on our lives and our goals in our life. We all left without torches in hand, 11:15 at the time with our teacher leading us. A few people were left behind approximately 1 kilometer between each person being dropped off. All were in random order. As each person was dropped off, the teacher took their torches, so they were left in pitch-black forest alone. This was apparently meant to be nice and calming for them, a time to reflect on things. Nope. It was my turn to sit alone. Teacher took my torch and threw it into his backpack, and the rest of the group kept going. I would have been the 6th person out of a group of 10, so I was somewhat right in the middle, so as any normal person would, I freaked out, sat down on a tree's roots, and then my senses went on overdrive. Ears felt like an elf's, pinned up and pointy as far as they could to pick up any noise. Funnily enough, I heard a branch crack. There was no use turning around to look because it was pitch black, though I did anyway. I had a lighter in my pocket and turned it on to comfort me. Bad idea. When I had it on is when shit started to go down. I started hearing my group talking as if they were coming back around to pick me up to go back to camp, and heard footsteps coming my way, sitting waiting anxiously for their arrival. It kept going on for at least 5 minutes. I still had the lighter on, and thinking back on it now, having a light being the center of attention in a pitch-black forest was not the brightest idea I've ever had. I heard my teacher call me over down the hiking path, saying that we were going now. It came from the right, but there were still people to be picked up from the left part of the path. I stood up and brushed myself, shaking like a wet cat. Started stepping over, and then there was silence, and I could feel an overwhelming feeling of being watched. The senses were peaking, and the heart was beating like hell. I heard something along the path growl and make its way towards me. At that point, I fucking noped and sprinted along the track to the nearest person that had been dropped off. It felt like fucking forever before I met the next person. I finally got to them, and they were panicking. We didn't say a thing because we knew what happened to both of us. We sat there sitting together, shoulder to shoulder, before we saw torchlights shining our way and a group of people talking, yelling, and making jokes. It was our teacher and group of teachers who didn't look very happy that I had left where I was dropped off. I explained to him what happened and he just thought I was being a little shit. Got back to our camp dorms and our group all exchanged stories, etc. And what we thought of when we were there. 2 others said they heard the same thing that I did and that they found it really weird and unsettling. Teacher said it was just our imagination running wild, but to this day, I can't believe that it was only my imagination. Might be some missing spots, but you can't blame me. It was a good 7 years ago at a school camp. Worst camp activity fucking ever.
Okay, so I'm a very skeptical person, but this is completely weird and I've never been able to explain it to myself. In 2004, I was but a wee 13-year-old lad in a St. Louis, Missouri suburb. One day I was walking to my local Hollywood video to rent a film. This was a roughly 2-mile walk through light forest and occasional streets. So I'm walking underneath a bridge for the Metrolink train. And as I remember looking to my right at a cell phone tower, which was maybe 25 feet from the roadway, I glanced down, and at the side of the road was a small black shape. I bent down and picked it up. It was a badge which said, DEA Special Agent. It was seated in a leather sort of shield for the back, and was definitely real. Way too much detail on it for it to be fake. So being a 13-year-old who was already obsessed with phones and radios and just beginning to see the world through those eyes, this was amazing. I mean, what a cool thing to find and have. This was going to be a great memento, right? I didn't tell anyone. I was kind of a loner as a kid and I didn't want anyone to know what I'd found. So I put it on my desk, safely in the back. I was given great privacy as a kid and no one ever went through my stuff. 1 week later, it was gone. I had looked at it a few times after getting it, and one day as I went to look it over, it was nowhere to be found. I mounted an extensive searching effort, but no trace of it ever turned up. Nothing. What the hell happened? Another time in 2005, me and a friend I'd met through an online phone hacker forum were urban exploring in an industrial area on the outskirts of Chicago after a Chicago 2600 meeting. They ran all night back then. We wandered deep into massive old warehouses, some unidentifiable factories and urban wasteland. As we rounded the bend into the rear courtyard of a rather large building, we saw lights approaching from behind us. We ran to a dumpster and hid behind it just in time. Slowly, an old, battered and white van with barely functioning headlights worked its way down the side alley and access road. It drove towards one of the entrances in the rear, and I began to look over this building. It was a factory of some sort, but all the windows were purposely obscured with a sort of red cloth. The van parked, and immediately, 2 large men walked out to the rear of the van, opened it, and led at least 20 to 25 people from the rear. But the way these 2 men surrounded these people, they were being very intimidating, and at one point pushed one of the figures down in the dirt. The entire group was led into the main building through a freight door, offering us a brief glimpse of an industrial area. Human trafficking, man. Later on, that same friend disappeared. He was a few years younger than me, which would have made him 12, maybe 14 at the time of this incident. This was December 2005. We talked steadily over the first half of 2006, then one day, nothing. His phone shut off, all email accounts go quiet, AIM and Facebook go quiet. It was extremely disturbing considering who he was. He was notorious on our forums for being a massive attention whore and posting a truly amazing level of photography, documenting even the most mundane details of his life. So the group at hand obviously has many resources to find people, and we put them to use. The various details we have on him, full name, address, are searched, and all of his records literally disappear. There is no missing persons report, nothing. The only family he has are a Polish immigrant mother who doesn't speak English, and whenever she was asked about him, he would immediately hang up the phone. Something wasn't right. I tried to find out when the last time he had definitively been seen was. A mutual friend had seen him at a Chicago 2600 meeting sometime in the first half of 2006. He said the kid seemed dazed and scared. He was there for an hour, sitting in a corner, then left.
Holy shit, dude, that's really interesting. What happened to him now? Any other stories? What did you do after they unloaded those people? Why not call the police? Your friend might have messed with the government some way. Possibly explains why all email, AIM, the Facebook was shut down or inactive. Messed up shit, though.
No one ever found out what happened. I've done extensive Google searches every half year or so for anything, even if it's just a confirmation he's alive, and nothing has ever been found. I still think about it from time to time and wonder what happened. Anyone else, and it wouldn't be a big deal, oh, he just left the scene, whatever. But this kid was different. Obsessed with urban exploration and phone hacking, obsessed with kind of being an attention whore, and one day like that has just disappeared. That just doesn't happen. Unfortunately, that entire forum is long gone. The area the regulars used to track people down was locked as well. I've got lots more stories from my teen years. Comes from no parental supervision, an obsession with exploration and extensive travel.
I have a bit of a woods adventure story. It's not the spookiest, but it was 100% real. So I started out in this heavily wooded park area in a smaller town near mine. It's usually full of people who like to jog, bike, etc., and it's huge and sprawling. I start heading east from the entrance, which is very near the southwest corner of the park. At first it's all nice, there's people jogging, etc., but I have an explorer in me and I start to go off the path a bit. Eventually I find myself lost in the woods and try to make my way out, but instead find myself at an unfamiliar, more weathered path. The woods around this path are rather thin, and I can see off in the distance a freeway, which is near the entrance, in the opposite direction I thought it was. I shrug and figure since I know where the entrance is again, I can safely keep exploring. Now I make it into an area where the path is surrounded by large bushes of raspberries and blackberries and whatnot. Big, thorny bushes. I can't see the freeway from there, and I'm lost again, and I'm starting to hear noises in the bushes beside me, rustling mostly. I start feeling unsettled by all that and keep going. I finally make my way to a large fenced-off area. Here I find a large reservoir-type water feature and an abandoned gas station. It must have been abandoned ages ago, because the prices were still around $1.69 per gallon, but it looks rather well kept, despite being empty. The oddest thing about this gas station is the complete lack of road access. It's in the middle of a forest, with nothing but this huge reservoir and a couple small walking paths around. Either way, I stop to pee into the reservoir and check on my iPhone to see where I am exactly. My iPhone's map places me on the far, far west end, where I most definitely am not. Great. Even better, after looking in the area a bunch, I can't find any sort of water in the area at all, aside from a stream in the park section, which I already knew about. I figure the map app is bullshit and give up on it. Now things get really odd, so I go back into the bush woods, this time trying to make sure I head west and only west, since I've been going almost entirely east this time. I make it to a large, gnarled tree with a bunch of torn tire treads hanging from its branches, like some weirdo decorated it. Pass by that and eventually come across a large fence with barbed wire on top. After some searching, I made it to a small gap in the fence, rolled away at the corner, probably by some guy. On the other side of the fence, I can see a sign which says, "Private property, trespassers will be shot." Oops, I guess I shouldn't have been there. This is now back into a thinly wooded area, and I can see the freeway again, on the other side of a rather thickly wooded area. I start hurrying in that direction, now dead tired and kinda paranoid due to everything that I just saw. That's when I hear a sound, something like a mountain lion scream. There's a lot that could have made that sound besides that, and it was far away, but I was feeling paranoid, and I start running toward the freeway. Finally, I find my way back to familiar areas, the nice paths through the woods, the stream, and joggers and bikers everywhere. I wandered a bit, and near the entrance I found some stoners who shared some weed and managed to calm myself down.
Before I dropped out of college, I was doing ROTC. For one of the field exercises, they drove us out to a patch of land owned by the Army that used to have an actual fort base on it, but which is now mostly abandoned to play Army. We were doing a land nav exercise and kept finding old roads, ruins of barracks, smokestacks with nothing hooked to them, shit like that, when we found some abandoned railroad tracks. We, myself and two other shithead cadets, checked our map and decided that the tracks looked like they were going to take us pretty close to the coordinates we were looking for, and it would be an easier hike than marching through the brush like we had been, so we followed them. The tracks weren't actually marked on the map, which seemed odd, but whatever. We were walking along bullshitting and basically just stumbled upon a weird-ass abandoned bunker thing out in the middle of nowhere. The only way I can describe it is to say it looked like a dam built into the hillside. It stood about 50 feet tall and was about as wide. The non-hill outer wall sloped away from the hill, and on closer inspection wasn't just concrete. It was covered with some sort of fireproofing poured onto what looked like chicken wire. The top of it was a flat deck with concrete arms coming off either side and extending out about another 50 feet, with another concrete beam joining the two, kind of like a hollow square jutting off the top. We couldn't resist checking it out. It had 2 doors, one on the bottom and one about halfway up the hill. The bottom one was hanging open, so we went to check it out first. Since my fellow cadets were wusses, I was voted to go inside first. The little bit of light let in by the door did pretty much nothing to light the way when I stepped onto a rickety-feeling catwalk. The room felt huge, and the acoustics inside confirmed as much, but I couldn't see shit. There were stairs off to the left, but I couldn't see how far down they went and didn't want to chance it, so I had them shut the door most of the way for a few minutes so my eyes could adjust. When they reopened the door, I could see that there was a floor about 5 feet down, and it looked solid, so I hopped down to it. The room was huge, hollow, and not all that interesting, really. After we got bored with it, we went back outside to check out the top door. Up to this point, the story is less creepy things found in the woods and more awesome things found in the woods, but things got a little weird when we checked out the top door. For starters, it had been welded shut, and recently, from the looks of things, the other thing was the brass. We had been finding expended brass all over the woods, but all of it was from blanks, but the brass we found at the bunker was different. For one thing, it didn't look like it had been out there all that long. Secondly, the brass was from live rounds, not blanks. We only found it around the welded door, nowhere else. Fucking weird.
There's a forest splitting 2 parts of my town. Now I live on the left side of that forest, which I didn't really mind since, a forest is quite funny as a kid. And as you grow older, you can use it to get some fresh air and a tiny bit of nature in a city. I never really had a reason to use that bridge I highlighted in red to get to the other side until I got friends with a boy who lived on the right side of that forest. He didn't live that far away from it either, so it was just through the forest. And I just walked some meters, and it's already soccer time. Now getting to him, I had many options, some a lot easier to do than others. I could take the bus that drives over that bridge and be there in about 10 minutes. I could walk over that bridge, or I could take the bike and drive through the forest, which was really the shortest and easiest way for me to do it. I became school friends with him in February, and in the beginning of spring we started playing soccer. I met the guys who also lived in his area and became good friends with all of them. Every day after playing with them, I'd ride my bike home through the forest. It wasn't really dark, but the sun wasn't showing either. But little me was just happy with the feeling of friends and having fun that he forgot everything around him. In the winter, I couldn't use my bike anymore since the whole forest was either full of ice, snow, or both. I had to walk over there. Walking took a lot longer than biking did because I had to walk slowly because of the ice, and walking in general is slower. Duh. Even though it was winter, we still had a lot of fun and time fly by, and it was dark before I knew it. I went my way and entered the forest. I didn't think anything of it since it wasn't only the forest at that time, it was my forest. I grew up with it. I knew the trees, I knew the shortcuts. I just knew everything about it. But as I got deeper into the forest, the silence got bigger. Then as I was about in the center of the forest, right at that point where civilization was the furthest away from little me, it hit me. I got chills and I felt something really heavy on my whole body. I thought someone was looking at me, but I didn't see anyone. I thought about running home the distance, or at least out of the forest as fast as possible. But something in my head told me that if I started running now, I'd regret it my whole life. I was crying rivers, but didn't make a single noise. After about 5 minutes, something broke the silence. A pair of dogs ran to me and followed their owner. I was relieved, and all the tension that was in my body before was gone now. The rest of the way home, I was just happy that nothing happened, and the next day I told myself that I'm a coward, and I shouldn't be afraid, and that it was probably nothing. Even though I knew there was nothing there, I now walked the route over the bridge instead of through the forest to get to the other side, and it was all well. Winter passed and I got older. I still visited that forest many times with my friends and came to the conclusion that I was just a little kid with a blooming fantasy. I picked up boxing and was now a confident young man at the verge of adulthood. My trainer told me that my stamina was bad and that I'd have to start running or I wouldn't make it far. No problem for me. I got a forest right next to my place, and I can jog there anytime I want. I started jogging, and I saw old relics from my childhood, trees my brother and I used to climb and that stuff, you know. I jogged until I was at my limit, which went from 1 hour to 2. As my time limit got longer, my routes did, and the more time passed, the darker it got. One winter day, I looked outside, but it was already dark. I didn't really care, though. At that time, I got dressed and started jogging. I don't know if I should call this my biggest mistake or my best decision ever, but let me just go on. I walked the way to the forest, and as I got nearer, my breathing got heavier until I was finally there, right in front of the forest. Normally, I'd start jogging as soon as I could see it, but this time I didn't. It wasn't that I didn't want to. My body refused to jog. I slowly walked up to the entrance, and I felt small, like a little child. The trees looked huge to me, as if they were hundreds of meters high, and the forest looked dark as if the sun couldn't even reach it. I was terrified, but my mind won over my body. I'm a grown man and I can beat up anyone I know. What do I have to fear? I let out a shout to release the tension and started jogging, but it was cold. Not only was my whole body cold, my heart was cold. I could only breathe in the cold and my whole body was cold. I just didn't feel well. There I was, jogging and looking around with my head like a maniac, as if I was searching for something. That was a huge mistake. With each step it got quieter and quieter until it got silent. It got silent again. I was afraid because I remembered that silence. It was horrifying. I didn't turn and walk back out. I thought of the quickest route to the main street from here on, and how I could take it without seeming all too suspicious that I would want to leave quickly. As I walked, I saw someone walking to me. He wasn't walking towards me, he was walking to me. It was slow and resting, but it had a destination, me. As I got nearer, I started to recognize his face. He was the old man from when I first had this feeling. Well, he looked at him, but he somehow wasn't. He was anything but that old man. What I didn't realize was that I got slower. I stopped jogging and started walking, and there I was 10 meters away from my worst nightmare. Being the dangerous boy I am, I shouted at him, asked him what he wanted looking at and that he should be rather looking away. He stopped when I started talking and I just felt like going crazy. I could feel the tears getting ready to just shoot out of my eyes and my heart beating. It was beating so hard that my hands twitched with every heartbeat. Then I snapped. I walked faster towards him and grabbed him by his shirt and told him that he should fuck off. While touching him, he just felt heavy. He had the body of a human, but I just couldn't lift him. His body wasn't hard. It didn't feel special. I don't know how to explain it, it just felt heavy. Then I raised my hand and hit him in the chest, but he didn't even flinch. I was mortified because he didn't even move. I threw my strongest punch that knocked people out, but he didn't even flinch. I, on the other hand, felt exhausted. I looked into his face and it seemed to me that he smiled, but he was totally expressionless. I just knew he was smiling. I shoved him to the ground and ran like I've never run before, but the heaviness didn't leave. My escape wasn't the prettiest, and I hurt myself pretty good. I finally got out of the forest with a bloody hand and some cuts here and there. Once I walked a few more meters out of there, I sat down at the bus stop and just cried. It was 10 p.m. weekdays, so nobody saw me, but I wanted someone to see me. I wanted there to be other humans that would show me that I'm not alone anymore. My body was just broken. I didn't want to move anymore, I just wanted to be home. The bus came 10 minutes late, and those were the longest 10 minutes in my life. I walked into the bus and sat down. The bus drove its way and we passed the forest. As I looked into it, I saw something. It wasn't human, but it wasn't a monster. Not like a hairy monster human or humanoid. I just saw something that was just there. It wasn't human, it was just something. I felt its presence until we passed the forest, and once I got home, I got a little bit calmer. I went to the hospital and got my wounds fixed, and never went into that forest again. So that's it, here I am now. I don't know what was there, and in all honesty, I don't care. I know it won't hurt anyone since, well, it didn't really hurt me. I think it could have gotten me if it wanted to. If it can hurt humans, I don't want to press my luck, but still, if it does hurt humans, I kind of feel that it is my responsibility. I just don't know.
I've had a similar experience myself too, but not in the forest. In fact, it was in my own house. It was during the night when I was walking in the house. All the lights were out except for my screen. As I used to live in a pretty tightly packed apartment area, there was plenty of light from outside, so I didn't need to have lights on at night. Anyway, I was going to get water from the kitchen. The kitchen was basically on the opposite side of the wall from my room, but I had to go there from the far end of my room where the door was. That same door gave me a view of the living room and the hallway to my sister's room. It was a long hallway with my sister's room at one end and the toilet at the other. I turned towards the kitchen and had the usual creepy feeling of walking there. I always had this weird paranoia of someone sitting on the couch in the living room at night. In fact, I often felt uneasy when near the living room at night and expected someone to always come around the corner from there when I was going past that spot. So when I headed back to my room, I got that similar feeling you described, like a sudden feeling of dread, so to speak. As if I knew that if I didn't move or get out of that spot, something really bad was about to happen. It felt as if something was chasing me, and I had to run away or I would die or get injured really badly. I felt as if something was approaching me really fast from the end of the hallway, so I reacted to it by turning around quickly, expecting to be hit by something. But there was no one there. Just an empty, dark hallway and the living room. I'm not sure what it could have been, but I've put my bets on some form of panic attack, as that's the only thing that makes sense to me. Me again. In fact, now that I think about things more, I do have some stories regarding forests. I used to spend a lot of time in areas near or in the middle of forests. For example, my friend's grandparents had a summer cabin in the middle of a large forest area right along a large lake. So one summer we were there. We had spent the early summer watching all sorts of horror movies, and we were about 12 years old at the time, seeing things like the original Exorcist, Stephen King's It and such. So naturally our imaginations were running quite wild. One day we were walking from their cabin to another place through the woods. Basically there was a road leading there, and along it took about 1 to 1.5 hours to walk. The forest basically continued endlessly for miles on each side of the road. So all you could see was trees and hills in each direction as far as you could see. We started to head there around late evening when the sun was already setting. We chose to cut through the forest rather than follow the road to get to the other house faster. To help the person living there with his boars, he had bought to raise, to build a pen for them and such. We had walked for around, I'd say roughly 15 to 20 minutes when we suddenly came upon this large opening. It was about half a mile wide and a mile-long stretch of mere grass with no trees whatsoever. No roads leading to it or anything, just forest all around it. And there was this really old, worn-out barn there. We were rather confused by that place since we didn't remember finding such a spot there before, let alone why anyone would build a barn there since no roads led to it, let alone abandon it. We went to look at it closer, and the doors were sadly locked, so we didn't get to peek inside. A friend suggested we try to break the chain with the lock on it with some rocks in the frost. I thought it would be impossible, but mostly because I was a coward, I kept telling him that it wasn't wise to do so. So we left the area towards the direction we assumed the house to be in, where we were heading to. We were pretty much joking, trying to scare each other about what could have been inside the barn, when we suddenly heard this twitching, cracking sound somewhere behind us. It clearly sounded like it was rather far away behind us, rather than close. Well, we looked behind us, but the sun had set so low that it was hard to see far away anymore. All we could see was forest all around, since it was about a 10-minute walk from the opening when we heard this sound. Naturally, we both got really freaked out and started to shout if anyone was there. Then we started to walk off, thinking it was just some animal. We walked for about a good few minutes further when we heard some twitching and cracking again. But this time it was pretty much right behind us. We just shouted as hard as we could and ran as fast as we could to the house. I have no idea what it was. Was it really an animal or what? But it sure as heck gave me the scare of my life, at least. And to top that off, when we got back to his grandparents' house that night, we had to ask the guy we visited to drive us back there in his van. The door in the room we were sleeping in, which was connected to the porch, broke slightly. It wouldn't stay locked and constantly opened up whenever we closed it. That, combined with our earlier experience, basically made at least my imagination run wild, and I just stayed awake the whole night while the door was held closed with a mere piece of string attached to a chair to prevent it from fully opening.
So, first of all, my uncle is a very, very religious man. He was a missionary. He told me this story a couple of years ago. He was on a mission in Guatemala. We live in Mexico. He was with a fellow missionary. They were in a small village within the jungle of Guatemala. They visit every house, but no one would give them shelter. There was a house which was apart from all the other houses. They knocked. An old woman opened the door. They asked if they could stay for the night. She accepted. She told them to go to the dining room and sit there with her children so they could all eat dinner. When they entered the dining room, they realized the children were human forms made of wicker. Also, their hands were tied. The lady told them they were misbehaving, so she had to tie them up. They just stared at each other. But it was night, and there was no chance they would sleep out in the jungle. So they sat down. My uncle needed to use the restroom. The lady told him it was outside the house. He got up, but he says he felt his heartbeat slow down and felt very heavy, as if something was holding him down. He got out of the house and headed to the bathroom. When he was there, he heard some whispering in what sounded to him as an indigenous language, which he thought was Kakchikel, which many people in the village spoke. When he got out, there was no one out there. He returned to the house and told his partner that they should leave that place. They did. When he got back to Mexico, he quit going on missions because of that.
I work for the Oregon Department of Forestry. It's my job to survey logging units and map out which areas can and can't be logged, where the yarders should be set up for safety ECT. So I spend most of my time driving a truck around the woods, surveying and taking notes. I think the most bizarre thing I've found was an old single-engine Cessna down in the trees. I spotted it from an adjacent hilltop and found my way over to it. There were no trails. I had to spend almost an hour beating brush through a very dense area to get to it. I reported it, but the Department of Forestry knew about it for years and never got it out. The people that live out there are the worst, though. Crazy fucks, usually. The worst is a lady near the coast that owns a wolf sanctuary. She always advertises to hunters that she takes old livestock carcasses as donations to feed her 10 wolves. No one ever sees her unless they go up there, which I did once. She's probably 60 years old, perpetually dirty, and a huge crazy witch. Usually when residents realize you're a Forest Service guy, they lighten up, but she outright refused to talk to me. I heard that a few years ago one of the wolves mauled her and nearly killed her, but she crawled almost a mile to the road and got help. She still does it, though. There's also Watershed Ted. He lives in a tiny 3-room house and watches the watershed. He's about 50, weird as hell, and likes to be naked, so he's not much fun to be around. Let's see. At one place, there's a big iron water tank that's been sitting in the forest since it was first logged in the early 20th century. Rumor has it some kids from one of the small towns got in it and got stuck in there, but it's probably not true. It's a scary-looking thing, though. It's about 12 feet tall and 20 feet long, rusty, held together with rivets, etc. It looks like an old submarine or something. Something unsettling I found once was a group of rotting mattresses in a small clearing with some garbage around it, obviously a hobo camp. The weird thing is that it's gated and posted land, and the nearest actual town was a good half-hour drive on the highway. I don't know what kind of crazy fucker would live out in the woods so far out of the way like that. There are a couple abandoned buildings, usually just an old falling-down barn or something. I found a Ford Model A in one of them. Being an Autobot, I wanted to save it, but it had been out there for probably the latter half of the century. Sometimes you'll see weird flashes out there too. In Northwest Oregon, there tend to be more thunderstorms, so those are a possibility, but sometimes there's no thunder. All the radio tower beacons nearby are red and the flashes are white. Not sure what to think.
My friend in Kansas has issues with deer. He's had a bunch of creepy encounters, but the ones I remember involve a shitload of deer and weed. I think so, at least in this first story. There could have been no weed and one deer. He was in cross-country in school, and they were out running some trails in the woods. He split off onto a harder trail alone, I think, to smoke weed. As he's jogging across this bridge, either a buck or a bunch of deer just come pounding across the bridge and knock him off, breaking his arm. The reason this is creepy is he's always telling me the deer is fucking with him, and he texts me and is like, "The fucking deer finally got me, threw me off a bridge and broke my arm." And I'm like, lol, what? The other story is he and some friends used to go smoke weed in this cellar left over from a torn-down house medium depth into the woods. They go there a lot, it seemed like. One day they are down there for not too long, they get up to leave, and the first step they take outside, they freeze. Standing all around are like 100, 200. Apparently this is from under hunting my dad, and uncles were out hunting once and said a few hundred yards away from them like 300 deer just stampeded out of the woods, and they didn't shoot any, they didn't even know what the fuck. Deer just chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cool and munching grass. A few look over at them and don't give a damn. I think he said they just stood there frozen forever, and may have just spent the night in the cellar. My friend was caught between being amazed and shitting himself. I think he's been attacked by deer on foot and in his car like 10 times. Maybe I should take him hunting. It might give him some revenge and make hunting easy, or might get us killed. Too spooky.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.